Yeah.
Yes?
I was just wondering what the poor mothers thought of their little children going to a school that was called kindergarten.
I assume it was explained to them because Julia Lloyd was a great one for explaining everything. So I assume that she certainly would make the principals know. I hadn't thought of that in that way.
Well, we use it, so
yes.
we know what it means, but I mean, it wouldn't have been.
A lot of people
use then.
A lot of people used it very loosely, and I think still do. I mean, kindergarten for many people is simply a preschool kind of place for children. But Julia Lloyd and many other women, they had very strong, well, and men too, but women did play, they were the overwhelming number of people who kept the movement going and developed it. And they very much felt that proper kindergarten was as I was trying to describe it, and Julia Lloyd described it, and not just a more interesting way of keeping children occupied. Now, Birmingham School Board was very enlightened for its day, and it certainly was interested in kindergarten schooling, and it's a long history, so I won't go into it, but they did have children under the age of 5 at the end of the 19th century in their schools. And they tried to give them kindergarten lessons, they called them. But there's a huge difference between being in a classroom in a normal school and suddenly it's kindergarten time, and being in a kindergarten all day where the whole ethos is about a particular way of learning.
It was the word itself I was thinking
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
What that word meant.
Well, I think it would have been explained.
Probably.
Because Julia Lloyd said a lot about children being plants in gardens, and I'm sure she would have explained. I say that, and I don't like saying it without evidence, but she certainly wrote about kindergartens, and she was a great publicist. I mean, if you look at the archives, she really wanted people to know what they were about. And she was also, there were several things. She felt, and I'm sure there are people in this room that often feel this, that as a nation we should do more for young children, and there should be public funding, and she wanted public funding. She didn't want them to be charities. She wanted it to be public funding, but you had to persuade people. So she wrote a lot of pamphlets and things, and she distributed them. She gave things free all the time to Birmingham City Library. She sent things off. She wanted people to know what was being done and to appreciate it and to realise how good it was. And she got very, very frustrated in the 1920s and 30s when, first of all, national government said that it would support what were now nurseries instead of kindergartens, nurseries. And then, because of the financial stringency of the time, withdrew the money. And so from the early 1920s onwards, there was trouble about this. And she and other people were saying, we've got all this evidence now to show how children are different if they get these chances when they're young. Isn't it worth spending the money? And then they were bringing in the usual things about what was likely, these children were likely to turn out if they didn't have this start in life, and how much that would cost the nation. But in the 20s and 30s, government had other things on their mind and didn't think this was so important. But you do, because the kindergarten and the nursery movements were growing very much. The difference between them was partly that the nursery movement, as it developed both parallel to and out of the kindergarten movement, had a very, very big emphasis on health. And the kindergarten movement Julia Lloyd was very keen on looking after the health of the children and started employing those women doctors I was talking about, who came for free, but they went to her kindergartens to look at the children. And then gradually it became part of the practice that there was an annual medical test of all the children. And she was very keen on this before it became law that you had to do it. So the nurseries were very much emphasising that you had to prevent children getting diseases and things, and you had to look after them. But so there's a lot going on.
Can I ask, how many children did she have at one time in her kindergarten?
Well,
it seemed to be wonderful for some children,
yes.
It must have been awful for others.
Well, this was the difficulty, and it is one of the big difficulties over the whole thing. She believed that in the whole kindergarten there shouldn't be more than 30. Because how can you give children that care? This is why she wanted there to be kindergartens everywhere. And she said, even her wealthy Quaker relatives could not give kindergartens to the whole of Birmingham, And she and others, and Oliver Lodge played a big part in this, the principal of Birmingham University and his wife and others. And they were pleading with national government, we must have these kindergartens and it has to be publicly funded. And what they were fighting for in 1914, where she sent all these documents up to London, to the Board of Education, was that local authorities could give a grant. Because in Birmingham, the local authority, the requisite committees were full of the very women who were or not full of them, but they had women who I think acted out of proportion to their numbers on these committees, and men who supported them, who would willingly have given a grant. But it was illegal. They weren't allowed to. And so they were fighting for this. And then it became legal. I'm going to get my dates wrong here. I think from 1917, but somewhere around there. But then after 1921, various authorities stopped giving it anyway, because they wanted to use the money differently and they didn't have as much as they needed. So, it's the same story.
I don't know about the women's settlement, but the settlement in Summer Lane in Birmingham is famous for the work that it did. This was one of the poorest areas of Birmingham. I think it's still there, and certainly all through my childhood there were always reports of various events at the settlement. And it was just referred to as
the settlement. Yes. Well, there's a book about the settlement. It's by Joyce Rimmer, isn't it? The Women's Settlement, which is certainly in Birmingham City Library and the University Library if you wanted to borrow it. But that's very interesting because it has a lot of detail and it goes right up, I think, to the mid-20th century. But I think you were saying about the settlement now. It's in difficulties.
Well, at one time it had a great many projects going on there. There was a big money advice centre, which is now not part of it. And there were groups from older people as well as young women and nurseries. But a lot of that was supported by grants, which didn't actually cover enough of the costs. So that it's had to retract now. My contact with this has not been so much recently, so I don't know exactly what's happening more recently, but certainly up to 5 years ago it was having to retract that, which is a shame because it had been so very active over many years.
Of course, the wish of the founders was that by the 21st century it would be needed. Yes.
You mentioned about, was it Julia Lloyd who went to America?
Yes.
And she was shocked to get there and find how far ahead of us they were with the equality of in the medical professions? Was
Oh.
or did I misunderstand you?
It was about the kindergartens. There were so
Oh, that
many
was-
of them.
Okay.
She said it was in Boston, but Boston was ahead of the game there on this. But again, in this case, many Unitarians. And she said in Boston it was the practice, particularly amongst the nonconformist chapels and churches, to have a kindergarten as a matter of course. So that there were quite a lot of them there, and she found that wonderful. And she came back saying, you know, why can't all these people here who say that they're religious, why can't they do it? You know, but yes, and that was interesting though, because she wrote quite a lot about her own life, but only about the professional part of it. I mean, she wanted what was done at the kindergartens to be known and why they were doing it. So she wrote about her professional training because she wanted people to know that this was how you trained and this is how it should be done, and so on. It's very difficult to find anything really personal. I mean, she'll write about the fact that she went to Berlin and how wonderful it all was there and what other people were doing. And she writes about her kindergartens and how they were set up and what happened. And I mean, she was the secretary for a Greek kindergarten for most of its life, all its life in fact, and treasurer for a number of years. And she wrote the reports. I mean, you know, it's easy to see that she's writing the reports, in fact, not because she says anything about herself, but because you get used to somebody's tone, don't you, and the way that they write. But she doesn't say anything about herself. So actually finding out personally about her was quite difficult. So in one way she was making herself known in that if you're going to publish the reports of something you're involved in and you're the secretary and your name is always appearing, but she doesn't say, I did this, you know, in that way. So she put together these wonderful, I showed a picture, I can't remember how far back it was now. To me. Right there. All these pictures that I was showing you are from her scrapbooks. And she put together these wonderful 2 big volumes. And she has all these pictures that were taken so that you can see the children at play, you can see them in their I don't know whether they called it classroom, really, because it wasn't like a classroom. And the people involved. And it's really interesting to look at it. And she did it all, you know. So if it hadn't been for her, we wouldn't have the archives to know about it. But she did it because she wanted people, she thought it was an important thing to do, and she wanted people to know about it, and she wanted Birmingham to know it was there. She said there are people in Birmingham who don't know anything about this. So yeah.
Thanks very much. We better get you to your train, I suppose. All right. So once again, thanks very much to Ruth for coming to speak to us this evening. Okay, thanks very much to you, and a safe journey home. Quickly pack up.